Welcome again. Here we are. Now we want briefly to talk about functionalism. So we already talked about these other theories of mind, dualism, monism. We talked about Mary's room. Now we want to go on to functionalism, which is the most promising and the most useful theory of mind for AI. Right? It doesn't matter whether you accept functionalism as a good description of how the brain works or how our mind works, but it is certainly the most useful for an engineer, and you will see in a moment why. And this is why AI people generally are functionalists. They are not identity theorists, they are not dualists, they are functionalists. You can already have an idea, because dualism, if you are an AI engineer, you want to construct a machine and you believe in dualism, for example, substance dualism, then you need a mental substance to get into your machine in order for your machine to have a mind. This is not something that will make an engineer happy, right? The requirement to put a soul into the machine, immaterial soul, right? How do we do this? So this would immediately destroy the prospects of creating a machine with a mind. If I am an identity theorist, it seems like this would be easier. It's equally difficult, because identity theory says mental states are particular brain states. So then how can a machine have a mental state? It will need to have a brain. Otherwise it cannot have a brain state. This means if I want to make a robot with a mind, I have to actually stick a human brain into the robot. Also not good, right? It's not what we want. The point of AI is not to take a brain and put it into a machine. Then you have a cyborg. A cyborg is not AI. The point of AI is to create artificial intelligence, not to create, a kind of elaborate full-body wheelchair for a brain, right? This is not what you want. So artificial intelligence wouldn't work with identity theory. It wouldn't work with dualism. It wouldn't work with epiphenomenalism, because if you have no brain, then you have no mental states again. So the most promising theory here is really functionalism. And this is why this is the theory that most programmers and most engineers and most AI people find intuitively the most plausible and the most helpful also. Okay, so let's see, what does functionalism say? It says that a mental state, for example fear, is defined by the role it plays in relation to other states, either states of the body, like screaming, trembling, high blood pressure, states of the environment, a fearsome thing must be present, and in relation to other mental states. So I don't explain fear by saying fear is the firing of this neuron over there. This is not fear. This would be identity theory, but this is not fear. I don't explain fear by saying fear is the trembling of my mortal soul, because it is afraid of being separated from the body. This is, a dualist description of fear. As a functionalist, I say fear is a state of my mind that is defined because it causes particular states of the body. It causes screaming, it causes trembling, it causes high blood pressure. It is caused by the perception of something in the environment that is perceived as a danger. And it is related to other mental states. For example, the belief that a fearsome thing is around, a desire to run away, a perception of something that causes fear. And if all these things are present at the same time, the body states, the thing in the environment, the other mental states, then my fear is proper justified fear, and then the state in which I am, I define as being a state of fear. Right? So fear itself is only defined as a state that has particular relations to other states of the mind, of the body, and of the environment. Functionalism, in a sentence, would say the essential defining feature of a mental state is the set of its causal relations to environmental effects on the body, to other mental states, and to bodily behavior. Okay. So all these together define the mental states and what it is and justify it as appropriate. These are two things, defining and justifying, right? If, for example, the cause of fear in the environment is missing, you would call the fear inappropriate. If I say, well, I'm so afraid, but there is nothing in front of me, then you would say this person is hallucinating. His fear is inappropriate. He is not supposed to be afraid, right? And you would deal with it by convincing the subject that his fear is not warranted. You would say, well, what are you screaming, man? There is nothing there, right? Or if someone had the fear but not the desire to flee, this would also be strange. Somebody has the fear is justified. You see, a lion coming to you, it looks hungry, it prepares, its teeth, and you hear its stomach rumbling, and it's standing a few steps in front of you, and you're just standing there, singing and looking at the lion and say, oh, what a nice, little cat this is. Then you would not accept this, again, as a right state of mind. You would say you should be afraid in this situation. Right? You would say this person is confused. He's crazy or something if he does not have the fear where he should have it. But, okay, this is functionalism. There is a counter-argument to the functionalism, is the Chinese nation argument, which is not above. It's later on. We will see it in a moment. A nice feature of functionalism, which is the reason why technologists and engineers love it, is that for a particular mental state to be present, some appropriate functional organization is needed, but not identical material organization. So in my brain, a mental state of fear can exist because I have all these other states to which fear is related and through which other states it is defined. But this is not necessary to be identically realized in a machine. If a machine has enough states so that it can, let's say in a computer, I can have a state of the processor with a memory and all these things, contain representations of fear, some things, and then the computer goes into a state of fear, which triggers a reflex to flee. A computer cannot do it, but a robot can if it has some wheels and an engine, right? It can start running. And then I would say the robot has an appropriate functional organization to perceive fear and to react to it. And then this would be okay. This would be good enough. It doesn't need to have a brain, right? So the functional organization then is different from the physical implementation. And this is a basic claim of functionalism, that I can have a functional organization, the same functional organization, on a different physical implementation. And the easiest way to understand this implementation independence is to take examples from other areas. So physical implementation means how the function is realized in the physical world, how something is constructed physically in order to fulfill the function. So let me give you an example. Do I have it here? Wait a second. No, for some reason the explanation is not here. Okay, so physical implementation, how something is realized in order to fulfill its function. So for example, these lecture notes, right? This lecture note, what you see there on the screen now beside my head, this is a piece of text that physically exists as pixels on your screen, on your phone's or your computer screen. Black pixels on a white pixel background. But this is not the only way how these lecture notes can exist. You can make a screenshot and print it out. If you print it out, you have the same lecture notes on paper. The same words, but now they're black ink on white paper. If you take notes, if you copy the words with a pencil on a piece of paper, now you have black pencil marks in your handwriting, which is totally different from this printed material in the way it looks. But it's still the same lecture notes, it's the same words. but they are realized physically in yet another way. And now when I'm speaking these notes to you in this video, I have spoken all these sentences, you got them as sound waves. You got the same content again as sound waves. And these sound waves represent the same ideas. They are also my lecture notes. And if you switch off this video and just listen to the sound, you will get the same lecture notes as an audio experience. Totally different physically, but the same lecture notes. And if I collect all the lecture notes and print them in a book and you buy the book, again a different physical experience, but the same lecture notes. Okay? So this is implementation independence. The lecture notes are, for the functionalist, are a kind of information, and this information can be presented in physically different ways. It can be materially realized in different ways, but all these different ways are the same lecture notes, right? So implementation independence does not, though, mean that I can realize it in every possible physical form, right? So the lecture notes need a particular fine grainness of the medium in order to be possible to encode them. You need to have, sufficient black dots on a piece of paper. If you try to encode the lecture notes with a very thick marker, for example, on a very small piece of paper, it will not be possible because you cannot fit this amount of information on your paper. Or if you try to put to put the lecture notes, no, I dropped it. Express the lecture notes with the help of this little can of peanuts. This will not be possible because the can of peanuts doesn't give you what you need, enough states to encode these lecture notes. But I could encode them, for example, as Morse code. I could Morse them with dots and dashes. I could encode my lecture notes also, right? This is possible. I have only 2 states then, dots and dashes, and 3, silence. But because I can make the list very long, then as a whole I still have enough states to encode all the words, right? But sometimes it's impossible because my systems are not physically, not according to the rules of the physical rules of the universe, not possible. So for example, very small humans, let's say 1 millimeter small humans like that. Sometimes in science fiction you see, a machine perhaps that can minimize things, make them small, and now they make a human small and you have these ant-like humans. This might not be physically possible, right? Because the cells would probably be too small to work. And in the brain then the heat produced by the brain would start, cooking the cells if there wasn't enough space to dissipate the heat, right? So there would be many problems physically with such humans. They are as a functionalist, you could imagine I can make a human, make him smaller, doesn't change his functional organization. In principle, this should be possible, but in physical reality, it's not possible because physical reality has other constraints, right? Physical constraints. Very big insects. Very big insects, another thing from science fiction. You have all these huge spiders going to eat, your city. This is not physically possible because insects, I know that spiders are not insects, in case you feel like complaining, but insects and spiders both breathe passively by having air diffuse through their bodies. And this is why in cold climates, insects are much smaller than they are in the tropics, because air that is colder, slower, cannot diffuse through the body of the insect, and the insect would asphyxiate, while in the tropics you have faster, warmer air, more molecule movement of the molecules, the air can diffuse through the body more, the insect can be bigger and still breathe. So a house-sized insect would not work because it couldn't breathe, right? It couldn't get enough oxygen. Again, there is no functionalist reason why a big spider would not work. A big spider is as good as a small spider, but it wouldn't work because of reasons of physics. In a similar way now, back to AI, although mind might be implementation independent, we might be able to make a machine, in principle, to think of a machine that implements a mind, it might be impossible to actually implement it outside of brains for physical reasons having to do with particular properties of the brain and the mind. Nobody knows, of course, which these properties are, and so we cannot say. But it is possible. So I just want to say this, because when you say you are a functionalist, you are saying that I'm willing to entertain the possibility that mind can be created in other ways outside of brains, but this does not mean that you can make the claim that it will be possible to create minds outside of brains, because the physical realizability might not be there. There might not exist the molecules we need outside of a brain or outside of biology. There might not be any other molecule that can do what, let's say, particular proteins do. And if we want these proteins, we need to have blood circulation and oxygen and cells, and so we end up with the brain again, right? It's possible. So you should not take functionalism as a too strong claim that we can construct a mind out of something that is not a brain. It just says we may be able to conceive of a functional organization of a mind outside of a brain, independently of the question of whether we can actually engineer such a thing. Right? So the functionalist theory of mind leaves the empirical issue open. Okay, we will stop here. This was a short introduction into functionalism. In the next video, we will contrast it to behaviorism, because these two are easily confused, and AI is always torn in both directions. You have strong behaviorist concepts in AI, for example, the Turing test, and you have strong functionalist leanings of engineers and AI philosophers and AI practitioners, and you have to be very clear about the relationship between functionalism and behaviorism in AI. Okay, this we will talk about in a moment. Thank you.